Okay, let's give everybody maybe 30 more seconds and then the show must go on.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Cool. Well, looks like we're at 1 o'clock. Zach, you wanna kick us off, and I'm sure people can trickle in here.
Let's do it. Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Outgrowing QuickBooks, Key Signs that it's time to move on. For the sake of time, we will get right to it. Perfect. Just a little bit of housekeeping, and I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Zach Loesch. I'm the marketing manager here at BrainSell. And yeah, again, this is going to be a 30-minute presentation with a live Q&A right at the end. If you have any questions at all, feel free to type them into the question box on the pane on the right-hand side of your screen. We will send a recording of the event as well as the slide deck right after the webinar concludes. And you will also get an email for which virtual meal delivery service gift card that you want right after this event as well. And just a little bit about BrainSell before we get started. We help businesses modernize their entire tech stack from finance to operations, sales, marketing, and customer service, so all your systems work better together. Whether you're exploring data strategy, ERP, or building AI readiness, we are here to help you take that next step.
Perfect.
And without further ado, I want to introduce everyone to our expert, Troy Hollings. Troy, hello, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. I'm Troy Hollings. As you see, I'm a cloud ERP account executive here at BrainSell. Been here for not too long, 4 or 5 months. Calling in from the great state of Indiana. And I like to share a fun fact on all these. So fun fact, I'm married a farm girl. We live on 25 acres. We've got a couple horses and even 10 goats, if you can believe it. So excited to talk. We're going to keep this pretty quick. If there are questions, put them in the chat. We'll try to save some time at the end, though, for questions. And so let's just quickly talk through what we're going to hit on today. Key signs you've outgrown QuickBooks. We're going to talk through some of those symptoms and kind of concepts that maybe QuickBooks might just really not be able to handle. We're going to then move to benefits of a modern ERP solution. I think there's a couple good ones that we recommend, but I think this also applies just broadly too. And then we'll move to, okay, you've said, you know what, I think we're outgrowing QuickBooks. I've heard about these systems out there. How do we evaluate? What do we look for? We'll do a quick comparison. We'll have some Q&A if you all have questions, and then we'll get on out of here. Okay, so Zach, can you queue up the poll for us, please?
Absolutely.
Awesome, and I won't read through all of these, but is QuickBooks taking you guys forever? Is it closing times? Maybe multiple entities? Doesn't play nice with others? We'll give it, what do you think, maybe 30 seconds, Zach?
Yeah, totally, that works for me. All right, I see some responses rolling in. Let's go share these results. Wow, okay, yeah, so we have a lot of people dealing with closing times and revenue recognition, scaling, and tracking inventory. That totally lines up with what we're hearing these days. Interesting.
Okay, so it's sometimes we'll have everybody will respond back and say tracking inventory, but it sounds like it's spread a little bit across a couple of those. So cool. Well, we'll try to hit on that. So let's move into what are some of the key signs it might be time to move off QuickBooks. Okay, so I'm gonna talk through this, but then have kind of created a case study here that we'll just walk through that illustrates some of this. But if you're looking at, have you outgrown QuickBooks? I think, are you spending tons of manual time creating reports? Like I'll give an example. Does creating a P&L by department or by program, does that take you way longer than you feel like it should? Is it lack of real-time visibility into financials, meaning, maybe you can get the numbers, but it's so painful and manual to get there that you end up not being able to say, hey, how did we do yesterday? I think we see a lot, multiple entity, multiple location, that can be a challenge. and then even just from a compliance perspective. But let's I'm from Indiana, kind of simple. If I don't hear it in a real example, I don't, it doesn't click. So the names have been changed to protect the innocent, but let's just talk through ABC Specialty Foods. And so very similar to a real company, they're in the food manufacturing industry. Imagine 85 employees, 22 million in revenue, and they're on QuickBooks Desktop Enterprise. And so, if we're thinking about that company, they began, let's just say, as a local organic snack producer, but then grew pretty quickly into multiple state distribution powerhouse with multiple different product lines. So they've got third-party warehousing, they've got a sales presence in 30 different states, and QuickBooks initially handled basic accounting pretty much no problem, has become a bottleneck for their scalability. So let's dig into a couple things that this company might be experiencing and see if some of that might be relevant to you all. So let's talk about that first one, that multi-entity support. So ABC expanded to open a second manufacturing plant in Texas and now has 2 legal entities. And so what that has forced them is QuickBooks forced the team to manage each entity in separate files. Consolidating financials were time consuming and error prone. And the finance team actually spent over 40 hours per month manually consolidating financials, which delayed the monthly close and caused inconsistent data for the executive team. So, when we're thinking about multi-entity, yes, that's the problem, but the impact is you're spending extra 40 hours a month manually consolidating financials. I know we had someone who talked about inventory. So ABC also had inventory management challenges. So they had SKU lists that were growing, 2 production facilities. QuickBooks just really couldn't handle inventory tracking across those multiple locations, which led to a ton of manual spreadsheets. If you have the inventory spreadsheet, that might resonate a little bit, but they actually lost $150,000 in revenue last year due to missed sales from stock issues. They had someone who wanted something, they didn't have it, and they didn't know they didn't have it until too late. We'll hit on a couple more here. One of the things, so kind of the opposite of manual reporting is they didn't have real-time insights or dashboards, and so they really were kind of stuck with the out-of-the-box reporting from QuickBooks, and they weren't able to find visibility real-time into metrics like cost of goods sold, profitability by product line, and inventory turnover, just basically making them slower to pivot, and kind of decisions are a little bit of that lick the finger, I think it's close enough. And then just as they got bigger, they now need to start thinking about, are we going to get audited? Are our financials GAAP compliant? And just auditors having to spend extra time validating data due to lack of audit trails. So I think a lot of that is probably self-explanatory, but if you're sitting there and you're ABC, that's painful, and those are all signs that you might be outgrowing QuickBooks. So let's move to, okay, so let's say we said, I think we're outgrowing QuickBooks. What is a modern ERP? What are some of the benefits of that? And so again, we've kind of talked about this, and some of this is all of those pains that you had with QuickBooks go away, but let's dig a second deeper. So real-time dashboards and reporting. A lot of times we'll make a distinction between a dashboard and a report. And a report in our minds is you do the advanced filter, you say, hey, I want to look at the number of quantity of this by this permutation, press a button, go. If you want to change it, you've got to rerun the report. Dashboard, on the other hand, is almost, the data all exists and a dashboard just overlays on top of it, so you can easily slice and dice and you don't have to run hundreds and hundreds of reports. Automation, that really helps a lot of times. QuickBooks, maybe everybody's doing everything manually. Also heard that QuickBooks maybe doesn't play nicely with others, and so many of these modern cloud ERPs, we're going to talk about a couple of them, by design, they are designed to integrate well with CRM. So, like in our business, for example, we have a CRM that says we booked an order, but we might get paid for that weeks later, months later. How do you reconcile those two? And then again, if you're starting to get more pressure on compliance and audit readiness, modern ERPs are set up to do that. So let's just continue the thought experiment here that you said, okay, you know what? I think we've got to move off of QuickBooks. I think we're looking at a cloud ERP. How do you evaluate these? And so you guys can read this, so everybody will get the slides. This is a lot of words here, so I'm not going to read all of them. But I think that the couple things I'll highlight here is current state versus future state. And so I think what we mean by that is, as you're thinking about your process, you need to think, what are those things that actually are 100% required for us to transact our business. And then there are the other things that are like, well, we've just kind of always done it this way, but if a new system came and had us do it a different way, it'd be no problem. Because I think you got to think about what's the constraint of the system, and if your business has a very specific nuance of your process, that's something you're gonna when you're interviewing these software vendors. Say, hey, it is critical that your software could do this. Can we talk about that? Obviously, budget, cost, that's very important. Though I think one of the things that we just want to make sure everybody thinks about in this example is total cost of ownership. And so, when you're thinking about an ERP, yeah, you sign up with the software vendor and you pay the licensing fee. But I mean, theoretically, this is going to be something you have 10, 15 years. I actually just talked to somebody today who their ERP, the oldest I've run across, it was from 1972. So probably not going to own it that long, but thinking about the total cost of ownership, because sometimes the cheapest is not the least expensive broadly. Well, we've talked a little bit about integrations, but if you have an ERP that plays nicely with other systems, that's very important. Industry-specific requirements. Let's take a second to talk about that. I think there are many of these systems. So, like we'll talk about Sage Intacct, we'll talk about Acumatica. They all have specific industry verticals, and so if you're in a spot where your industry is very customized, let's say you have specific requirements in the distribution industry, we recommend looking at systems that have industry-specific setups. And Zach, I think I'm getting a chat here. Okay. Perfect. We're just saying if anybody has any questions, drop them in the Q&A. Yep. Flexibility and ability to scale. I'm going to hold talking about that until we talk about the licensing, because that is a very important factor. And then automation and AI capabilities. Everybody in the world is talking about AI right now, and it's kind of hard to parse the signal through the noise. But also, all of these systems are really pushing, how do we do automation? How do we do AI? And so, just knowing that there's going to be some interesting capabilities that you can see with these systems, I think that's something that we would evaluate. So let's do a quick comparison here. So if we see what we're looking at, there's obviously a ton of different systems. There's QuickBooks, there's Sage Intacct, there's Acumatica, there's NetSuite, there's Microsoft Business Central. We at BrainSell a lot of times find that Sage Intacct and Acumatica tend to be our preferred, but I think this applies broadly some of the principles here. So first is cloud native. And so if we think about QuickBooks, that's partial. They do have QuickBooks Online, but cloud native kind of, I think a lot of times you'll hear these ERPs that are really on-prem, but they say they're in the cloud and it's a hosted solution where you have to remote into the server. That's when we're saying cloud native. It would be kind of like going to Gmail. You'd go to sageintact.com/your company, and then you would log in. And so that benefits of that would be, you have remote users, you don't have to have somebody remote in. So QuickBooks, partial, probably not. Sage Intacct, Acumatica, both of them are cloud native. I think NetSuite, I think is as well, though I don't run across it quite as much. Multi-entity, multi-currency, QuickBooks, no. Sage Intacct, Acumatica, yes. And so, like, what does that look like in practice? Well, I was talking to a client. They were a nonprofit. They did work. They were out of Chicago, but then did work in Kenya and like 7 other countries. And so they had to navigate 7 different currencies, and their system really wasn't able to do it natively. And so I talked to the IT director, and he was basically raising the white flag and saying, this is, we've built such a customized manual beast to track and convert these currencies that we just need a better way. And so I'd say if you're moving globally, that is something that we see a ton. Going to skip custom dashboards reporting. We talked about that. Integration and flexibility. So QuickBooks Basic, what that means is, you can get data in and out of QuickBooks, but it's not always that easy compared to, Sage Intacct, Acumatica, way easier to get data in and out. And so API and Marketplace, what that means is they have an API which you can effectively plug in to either of those systems, and they also have a marketplace. So think add-on, think like Chrome extension add-on. So there's a whole marketplace of add-ons that you could use. Let's keep talking about scalability. So again, this is kind of a little bit obvious, but if you're really growing, you don't need it. Like I remember I was at the past company I was at, we were on an ERP system that was, we'll say, clunky and old, and we knew if we got over 10,000 employees, it was going to break. And we were at like 9,925. And so when we're saying scalability, that's kind of what we mean of, okay, is there going to be a point where this is just going to force you to have to address this, and it's not going to work? So I think the reason we have medium for Sage Intacct and Acumatica is, I think we think about Sage Intacct and Acumatica as mid-market, maybe light enterprise. If you looked at like an SAP, some big Oracle software, that would be the most scalable, but that's also millions of dollars. And so I think for the transition of going from QuickBooks to a little bit bigger system, I think that's how we think about Sage Intacct and Acumatica. I basically just said what it's ideal for, but just reiterating: QuickBooks, small, medium business; Sage Intacct, it's that mid-market, maybe light enterprise. And then what I just want to take a second on are these last 2. So licensing model. And this is one of those that, it's what you don't want to do is like when you sign up for terms and conditions and just click next, 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 next. This actually really can matter. And so there's kind of 2 approaches. There's user-based and there's consumption-based. And so what does that mean? Well, we'll talk about Acumatica as an example first. So that's consumption-based. And so what that means is that you pay based on the number of transactions that you have going through the system. And so but you can get unlimited users. And so, let's say you had somebody that had 150 people that ideally would want to be in the system, and you don't have that many transactions. That could be a really good example of saving a ton of money using consumption-based licensing versus paying for 150 licenses would probably be price prohibitive. Now let's flip that around though. I actually talked to somebody, I think it was yesterday, it's all running into one long webinar, but I talked to somebody yesterday who they're an e-commerce company. They had 6 users, but they had millions of transactions. They'd go through Shopify, and they were thinking about, okay, well, maybe we should look at Acumatica. Well, maybe, but also you only have 6 users, but you have so many transactions that it might be artificially more costly. And so, I think not even having value judgments on user-based or consumption, I think either can make sense, but just knowing when you're getting into the conversation, how does your business work, and then mapping that over to the effective licensing costs. So last thing we'll just say is industry, and this goes back to what we were talking about before. Do you have a specific industry need? And then if so, can you find software that maps over to that? And so if we're looking at Sage Intacct and Acumatica, let's start with Sage. So nonprofits. Sage Intacct is really good for nonprofits that don't have a ton of inventory, heavy manufacturing. I'd say Sage Intacct is probably not a great fit for those, but it has a really robust grants module, for example. I've got a client that's a mental health facility, and they have a ton of different grants, some state, some federal, some local, all with different deadlines and due dates and reporting requirements. And they run it all in Sage Intacct and are able to do what used to be kind of this manual Frankenstein process, able to just handle that. Healthcare, another great example, that tends to be a good fit. Professional services, so financial services, you're an attorney, maybe you're a CPA, those types of things tend to work well in Sage Intacct. And then going to the other side, I think if you're doing manufacturing in earnest, I think Sage Intacct might just not have what you needed to do. So construction, if you're having a ton of different inventory, if you have a really complicated bill of materials process, I think Sage Intacct knocks it out of the park for the accounting, the financials portion for those other verticals. But I would say distribution, e-commerce, you're probably looking more at like an Acumatica. So I know that was a rapid fire here. I know we're also coming up on time. Zach, I know we've got some questions here, but do you have any thoughts, or maybe we kick it over to Q&A?
Yeah, totally. We have a couple questions right now, and a reminder to all, I know we just went through the side-by-side comparison. If you have any questions, feel free to use the chat box. First question, can you explain a little bit more on the effort needed to do a migration?
Sure. Yes, and so I think I'm going to give you the unhelpful answer of it depends, but then I'll give you the helpful answer of just some more context. So I think it really does depend on a few things, but I think at the fastest we've seen 2 to 3 months, and on the slower end we see 5 to 6 months. And what goes into that? Well, again, so talk to a lot of people all the time, but I was talking to somebody yesterday who they're thinking about moving from Sage 300 to Sage Intacct, and we were just kind of saying, okay, well, let's just talk about that, what goes into that. And they were sharing that in their example, they moved to Sage 300 6 years ago, and that process, they completely from the ground up built all of the GL again, they built the chart of accounts, they had to totally set it all up again because they realized that they just, they hadn't done it right the first time. But they did that effort, and then now it's very easy. It's effectively going to be a lift and shift. And so I think one of the things that really goes into this is how much changing and editing and adjusting your actual accounting process is going to go into the new system. If it's, hey, everything really works, we just need to get it into a better system that can handle inventory or whatever, that could be easier. So that's one of the factors. I think how many people touch the overall project. If you're doing an implementation for 3 users versus 300 users, that can go into it. And then, I think lastly is there are just differences across industry too. I was talking to somebody today that they're they're like a lime gravel distributor. And so they really, like, their process is pretty simple. They basically grind it up, put it in a bag, ship it out. But then there's other people whose process, they've got thousands and thousands and thousands of SKUs. So long, somewhat helpful answer of it depends, but I think those are some of the things that it does depend on.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Troy. We have one more as well. What does a cloud ERP generally cost compared to QuickBooks?
Yeah. So again, does really depend, and I think it depends too on the add-ons. And so I'll just speak broadly. So there's two parts of any cloud ERP project. There's the software and the implementation. And so I think at the low end, software for like a Sage Intacct or an Acumatica, it might be 15 to 25K, and the implementation's probably, you could think, 1 times or 1.5 times that. On the high end, maybe it's 50 to 75K for the software, and again, maybe 1 to 1.5 times that. And again, a lot of that depends on what do you really need it to do. If it's very simple, you don't need a ton of modules, it's basically just the financials, that's going to be on the lower end. If it's really complicated, you need multiple entities, multiple currencies, inventory, warehouse management, that can be on the higher end. But I think that like undertone of that though is there's an unlimited amount of softwares out there in the world, and just because you can upgrade doesn't necessarily mean you should. When we look at these projects, we just always try to graph them against what is the current process. Is there a way you can extend the life of your current QuickBooks? And if there is, maybe that does make sense. But I think there's got to be enough of a pain, enough of a cost that it makes sense to switch.
Wonderful. Thank you, Troy. I think for time, I think we should move on to the next slide. But yeah, if anyone does have any questions, feel free to reach out and we'll get you an answer.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us on this rapid fire here. Zach, I'm getting a noticing I may be experiencing network difficulties. Do I look good? Look fine? You can still hear me?
Look good to me.
Okay, we'll push on. So cool. Well, thanks everybody again. I think just in general, we're very willing to have a conversation. If you're sitting here and saying, some of this resonated, but I'm not sure if we're big enough, and I'm not sure if we can afford that. Like, we're always willing to just jump on a call and understand what you're currently doing and say, hey. That said, I think on the left side, happy to just jump on a call. On the right side, I think we did want to offer, if you wanted us to take a look and do a free QuickBooks assessment and look at your current QuickBooks instance and kind of just give you our thoughts of, hey, if we were you, we'd consider switching or we wouldn't consider switching, and here are some of the systems we might consider. Just let us know. We'll send the slides out. You can email marketing@brainsell.com, and we're happy to jump on a call and say hello. And Zach, you want to maybe close us out here?
Sure. Wonderful. Thank you, Troy, and thank you everyone for showing up to today's event. As Troy mentioned, if you do have any questions whatsoever, want us to just take a look or just had a floater question, feel free to reach out to marketing@brainsell.com. You will receive the slide deck and the recording of this event later this afternoon. And yeah, thank you all again, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.
The most important thing I know if I'm sitting there is what's the process for getting the gift card? We'll follow up and
yes, absolutely.
Learn concept.
Yep, that email will also be going out this afternoon as a part of the recording email as well. Perfect.
Okay. I think with that, we're right at time, everybody. So thanks again. Really appreciate it. And give us a shout if you need anything. Okay.